Let's give him a big round of applause. Dan Saffer.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Brad. It's great to be here. I love Web Visions. It's weirdly enough, it was my first conference I ever spoke at 10 years ago, and I was terrible. So I'm glad that they've had me back. And it's always great to be here in Portland. I had a fun encounter with a Portland native on my way here. A homeless gentleman approached me on the street, then started blocking me so I couldn't go forward, and he gets right up in my face and says, "Stop it." And I said, "Okay, I will." So I don't actually know what I'm supposed to be stopping. It might be this talk. Hopefully it's not. But it's always great to be back in Portland. So this talk, quick show of hands. I'm going to embarrass you very briefly. How many of you have ever been bored at work? How many of you have ever felt stuck at work and have not, been able to get like a good idea going? How many of you have ever failed at work, just bombed? Great. This talk is for you. This talk is for all of you. I dedicate this talk to you people who are my people. Because this talk is about how you can overcome those things, how you can be more creative. But first I'm going to tell you a secret, namely that I do not like the word creative. It comes from too many years working in agencies where there's the creative team, as though we had a monopoly on creativity. But the other part is that I've never thought of myself as a creative person. I never, even though my job title for so many years was creative director. I was actually supposed to be, directing creativity. But I just never liked, and I never felt being creative, even when I was creative. I never felt, I always thought of creativity as like this guy. And I never felt like this guy. Or you start thinking about creativity, people like, Virginia Woolf or Toni Morrison, or, Einstein, Shakespeare, all those people. And you start thinking about that, and I've never felt like that. I've never felt like that. But I know that I have been creative. I know I have. In 2008, I had a really creative year. I started a conference. I had a couple cello recitals. I was doing a whole bunch of design projects. I started my own design studio. I wrote a book. But then the weird thing was, by 2011, all that was gone. It was all gone. I left the company that I started. I was broke. I had no job. Nobody was inviting me to come speak at events like this. My book that I had out was terrible, and I never thought I was going to write another again. And I was working on some really terrible projects for some really terrible companies. And frankly, I just never knew whether I was going to be creative again. It just seems like, well, this is kind of the end. But then I said, well, I just needed to do something before my entire professional career dried up. And that's where I had to start thinking about creativity in a different way. And that's where I started thinking about practical creativity. Because all my life I'd taken a pretty haphazard approach to my own creativity, but now I needed something to save me. And what I found, I started calling practical creativity. Now, I'm not here to teach you how to be creative. I'm only going to talk about how you can think about creativity and what are some practical, simple, everyday tools that you can use from the minute that you step outside of this room, so that when it comes time for you to be creative, you can be. And so here's what we're going to talk about over the next couple bits. So the first was about reframing creativity, thinking about it in a different way. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the grappling hook, which is what the parts of projects are all about. And then talking really the meat of this is about building your creative habit. How do you go about building a habit of creativity. And then the last bit, we'll talk a little bit about what happens when things don't go well, when you fail, or when you get stuck. So the first thing I had to do was stop thinking about creativity like this guy, and start thinking about creativity like this guy. This is Michael Bierut. He's a partner at the New York design firm Pentagram. He has more awards than probably everyone in this room put together. He was a former president of American Institute of Graphic Arts. He's done work for Saks Fifth Avenue, the New York Times, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Very, very creative, very accomplished guy. So it surprised me when I read this that he said. So, he said, I don't think design involves that much creativity. It involves creativity in the way that doing a crossword puzzle involves creativity. You need some imagination and knowledge. So this kind of surprised me. Like, oh, someone this accomplished is saying that design is mostly built out of imagination and knowledge. And so that's what I started thinking of this kind of practical creativity centered on, having this imagination and knowledge combined. But then, of course, what differentiates designers and people who work on products from artists are constraints. And design and creativity really happens when you bounce off constraints. But the trick is, unlike with artists, our constraints are from the outside. They come in through users, through users or business or the technology that we're using, the hardware. All these things create outside constraints. If you're working as an artist, you make your own constraints. Oh, this is going to be a sci-fi novel, and so you have to use the constraints of the genre, those kinds of things. And then there's also time. The work that we do is involved on a deadline. This is both a good and a bad thing. Good in that deadlines really focus the mind and force us to make choices, but bad in that sometimes if you're forced to make the wrong choice too early. In fact, one adage you could say, if you want to be more creative, simply spend more time with the problem. Most creative ideas take a long time to percolate. The really good ones take a long time, sometimes even decades. Even something as simple as this talk took like a year to make. So the longer you can mull over an idea without acting, probably the more creative and the better off it's going to be. The catch-22, of course, we don't usually control our own schedules. The obligatory Steve Jobs quotes here, this idea of living with the problem. Living with the problem, I think, is extremely important. And I think this is where the value of user research comes in, is simply living with the problem longer than you might otherwise have, and learning to think about the problem from multiple angles, some of which may not be your own. So that's how I started to think about creativity. But then I was like, well, how do I start redoing the work again? What is the work to me? If I was no longer constrained to being creative, how did I start to work, to think about the work? And that's where the grappling hook comes in. So grappling hooks, for those of you who don't know, beloved of ninjas everywhere. There's a hook, you throw it up, there's a line, you climb up the line. Beloved of ninjas and design ninjas too, I guess. But what's interesting is you can think about creative projects and creative products as a combination of the hook and the line in a grappling hook. So the hook is what draws people in. It draws the audience in, draws the creator in. It probably draws what drew you or your clients in as well. So often the problem comes with its own hook. It's a solution to the problem. So, and sometimes we call these features, sometimes we call these micro interactions. So things like, hey, what if I didn't have to wait for a taxi? Or what if there was a bookstore that had, every book? The hook answers what is interesting or memorable about this product. I mean, hooks, we know what these are, right? So that, the whole, musicians know what hooks are. So, but the trickier thing is the line. Once we know what the hooks is, Then you have to ask what the line. The line is the thing that gives the work resonance. It's the theme or the melody that ties everything together. So in the kind of work that we all do, that is usually some kind of metaphor or design principles or interaction model that ties all the features together into a whole. This line is the idea that, the structure, the spine, the theme that ties everything together. So things without hooks are unremarkable, kind of boring, or things without the line seem kind of frivolous or disjointed. They're just a collection of features. So where do we get these? Where do we get hooks and lines? So as John Cleese said, where we get ideas from, but we don't get them from our laptops. The idea is that, getting started is really the hard part, which is why I think practical creativity is in some ways a little bit easier than art. We get a lot of problems handed to us. We don't have to generate these things ourselves. These kinds of things can help you really find hooks, if only by inverting them to find the opposite. So what if my thermostat wasn't dumb, instead was smart? Or, what if I didn't have to guess which restaurants in this neighborhood most people enjoyed? And lines are even harder to find because you have to search for that deeper truth out there of what the product is and what it really means to people. Now, this is not easy, and I've made a complete list of things that inhibit creativity. Everything. So almost everything is going to distract you from being creative. The mundane tasks that you have, Twitter, Facebook, RSS, television, email, that podcast that you enjoy binging on so much, the full season of Daredevil that you have to watch on Netflix. Everything is going to seem a lot easier and more enjoyable than doing something creative. I mean, instead of doing this presentation, I had to find out what was the top 25 sitcom episodes of all time. I just had to know. But in order really to do something different, to be something different, you have to do different things. A really depressing statistic is that 90% of what we do every day is habit. We get up, we brush our teeth, we eat breakfast, we go to work, we do this, we do that. It's habit. But in order to be more creative, you have to both break out of your routine and create a new routine, a creative routine. And that's where building the creative habit comes in. So before you think that I regularly do all these things, this is as much a checklist for me as it is for all of us. As soon as I find that I'm feeling less creative, if I can turn and start doing some of these things, I immediately begin to feel more creative, to feel better about things. So, but if I had one thing to tell you about what it is that you can do to be more creative, it's this one thing: prepare. Not only prepare immediately before you're being creative, but also long-term preparation as well. To be creative at a moment's notice often requires that you've done a lot of preparation so that you have that imagination and knowledge that Michael Bierut talks about to draw upon at that moment's notice. So the first and kind of easiest thing to do to build your creative habit, read books. Not these books. Seriously, when you get into design, you want to grow. You want to start stretching your mind. Fiction's a great way to do this, especially things like science fiction or historical fiction, things that give you a different perspective on either our times now or our times later. When you're starting out, you do definitely want to read design books. Read as many of them as you can. But once you're established, I urge you to read as few as you can. Now, this next one is about blocking off time for creativity. So this is obvious. You just can't expect creative stuff to happen. You can't expect projects to kind of get themselves done. You have to make time for them. You have to really fit that time in. And it's always better to have a smaller, consistent block of time across many days than to wait for some future date where you've got, a large block of time somewhere. Oh, that mythical 2 hours that you're going to have, on Saturday to really spend time. that often just doesn't happen. For me, blocking out just a small bit of time every day allows me to do things like write books, because you can write a full book in a year in very short bursts if you just are consistent with it. And importantly, it's important to know when you are the most creative. For most of us, this is about 90 minutes at a stretch, maybe at most up to 3 hours. And sometimes for most of us, this can be early morning or late at night. And you have to really figure out what it is. And it's not usually the afternoon, which of course is the time where most of us have our largest block of time to do the work that we're doing. But importantly, you never want to do your peak creative work during your off-peak creativity time. So you always want to try to map the two together. So, you want to put that creative time on your calendar and then show up every day to do that. An important thing is to really start with a ritual. You want to get yourself into a creative state even when you don't feel like being in that state. And that's really where ritual comes about. So Twyla Tharp, who wrote one of the best books about creativity called The Creative Habit, she has a very complicated ritual to get started. She gets up at 4:30 in the morning and she goes to the gym, and then she has a whole other set. So she has this long, extended ritual. I have a cup of tea and put on some Brian Eno. So very, it can be as complex or as long as possible. But your ritual could be anything. It could be being in a particular place. It could be, with a particular pencil, with a particular notebook. There's all kinds of things. I heard of an author who, watched out his window and counted until he saw 3 cars pass, and then he started to work. Whatever your ritual is, it's important to kind of get you into the mind, even when you're not feeling like you want to be creative. Keeping a list of big questions is a really interesting mind trick, because we're so distracted by so many things all the time during our days. So having a list of 3 questions that your subconscious should be working on is a really good mind hack. So, and if you phrase them in the form of a question, it helps your mind, because your mind hates to have unanswered questions. So having them visible somewhere on a card near your desk, or up on the wall, or on a whiteboard like I do, that's a way for your mind to work on it subconsciously when you're not focused on it. So let's say you're working on an app to record TV shows. So you may want to have something up as a question somewhere that says, hey, what is the future of television? So it's something that your mind can work on. And this is really how you come up with things like hooks, how you come up with things like lines. And keeping on your brain on this kind of low simmer always allows for serendipity. And this always happens to me. As I'm working on a project, articles will appear related to that project. Half the quotes and research that was coming out as I was writing this was just appearing as I was working on it. So I hate to tell you this, but your brain is not very good. It's not going to remember that idea you had yesterday, the essay that you read a few months ago. You're probably not going to remember much of this talk. So you need some means of distributed cognition. You need some ways of having your brain be physicalized, and that is where notebooks come in. And these can be digital, they can be physical. I have 2 digital notebooks and 3 physical ones, so I've got 5. I don't recommend that to anybody. It's a lot to carry. But the whole reason to have the notebooks is to record the hooks that come up, record those quick ideas, building knowledge. And one just side note with this, just don't be pretentious about the notebooks. I mean, it's, we've all seen those people. Don't be those people. Just keep a notebook. taking walks. So this is a picture of Darwin's thinking path at the Down House. So when Darwin was stuck, he would take a walk. He just walked on this path over and over and over and over and over. And movement helps the body relax, helps the subconscious work. I mean, too often I find myself just staring at the computer screen or the whiteboard or whatever, when really I should just get up and walk around the block. And there's a lot of research that says that this is a great idea. So this is a Stanford study, 2014. So walking indoors or outdoors, boosted creative inspiration. So it doesn't even matter if you go outside. It doesn't matter if you stand up and just pace around your cube, pace around the office. It's the movement that makes things great. And this has been noticed throughout all time. I mean, Friedrich Nietzsche, who really did have the best mustache of any philosopher ever, said, he would fit right in Portland. He said, all great thoughts are conceived by walking. The whole point of this is really, is this idea of filling the well. So you have to be creative at a moment's notice frequently. Hey, let's go brainstorm about this, or hey, what do you think about that? And so you need this storehouse of really good ideas, or else it's like driving a car with an empty tank of gas. So your job as creative people is to collect good ideas and find different ways of experiencing and seeing the world. You're trying to collect that knowledge so that you can combine it with imagination. And things like art is great for this. A good art really exists to disrupt the normal way we see the world. Things like travel is another great example. Another different ways of seeing how people are living. Conferences like this one, another great way of being presented with something different. Any project managers in the room, close your ears. This idea that efficiency can sometimes be the enemy of creativity. If you're trying to do things the most fastest, most efficient way, you're often going to miss out. You should try to take a different route home, or go window shopping, or talk to someone you don't know. And I think this is true of process as well. Sometimes if you're trying to do, the thing the fastest, most efficient way, sometimes the less creative that's going to be. And that's, of course, to a point there. Killing your defaults is part of this. Accepting and justifying default systems is this idea of a it's a soothing function. It's an emotional painkiller, right? I mean, if the world is supposed to work this way, well, what if it doesn't? What if it's not supposed to work this way? Accepting that the world is how it is taking away some of our agency, and thinking about different ways that the world could work is a pathway to creativity. The starting point is curiosity. Just wondering why this default exists in the first place. And it's all this idea of, creating different ways of looking at the world. What I call, this bag of lenses. You want to find these different lenses. You want to steal them. You want to build them. If someone says, "Oh, look at this," or this doesn't mean to be constantly looking around to see how other people have solved a particular problem, because I think no problem is ever a completely solved problem, and certainly look around, but by looking around, you might think, hey, this is a solved problem. Other people have done it this way. I should just do it that way. But to me, I think it's more important that you strive that your product be better, and then it's going to be different. You don't have to look to see how other people have solved it all the time. Your mind needs time to think. It needs time to process. Who here, like me, often finds themselves aimlessly going from Facebook to email to Twitter to RSS, repeat. And I catch myself doing that. I know that it's time to unplug and maybe take a walk. We have a tendency these days, just to want to fill every damn moment with something coming in. And we need to realize that being bored and staring off into space is is fine. Allowing your mind to wander actually allows like new ideas to enter. Easiest way to do this, the next time that you're waiting in line, don't pull out your phone. When you go out to lunch after this, just stand there. Let yourself sit in line for 5 whole minutes without doing something else and just be bored. This is going to be really hard. This UVA study found that 700 people, they thought it was unpleasant to be in the room with their thoughts for 6 to 15 minutes, just 6 to 15 minutes. But more so, in another experiment, 64% of men and 15% of women, which again goes to show that women are smarter than men, but began to self-administer electric shocks to themselves when they were left alone to think. And these were people who said previously that they would pay to not have electric shocks given to them. So it is a difficult thing to just sit there and be with yourself. As I believe our modern philosopher king, Louis C.K., will amply illustrate in this clip.
Thing is, you need to build an ability to just be yourself and not be doing something. That's what the phones are taking away.
Yes.
Is the ability to just sit there, like this. That's being a person, right?
Yes.
No one can. You gotta check, because underneath everything in your life, there's that thing, that empty, forever empty. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes,
I know what you're talking
that
about.
knowledge that it's all for nothing and you're alone. It's down there. And sometimes when things clear away, you're not watching it, you're in your car and you start going, oh no, here it comes, that I am alone, like it starts to visit on you. Just the sadness.
Yes.
Life is tremendously sad just by, being in it. And so you're driving, and then you go, that's why we text and drive. I look around, pretty much 100% of people driving are texting.
Yes.
And they're killing, everybody's murdering each other with their cars.
Yes.
But people are willing to risk taking a life and ruining their own because they don't want to be alone for a second.
Yes. One way to do this, so in the Jewish tradition, the Shabbat is this day of rest. The seventh day on which God rested after making the heavens and the earth. But you need to rest as well. So you need this time away. So this is the idea of taking like a screen sabbatical or screen Shabbat. So Tiffany Shalane is one of the big advocates for this. And her idea is that one day a week you just need to get your mind into a totally different mode, and it's a way to reset yourself. And for me, it's just pick a weekend day, because weekdays are going to be too hard. And even a half day is going to give you a lot more perspective on your work. I like to do Saturday afternoon to Sunday morning. Not much happens around then, so it's pretty easy to turn off then. Bored Elon Musk got it right. The best ideas come to your shower, because the only place that you're not looking at a screen. So once or twice a year, do a longer session. Take a screen sabbatical. I do a week in the summer and a week right after Christmas. 2 days, it's terrible, and then after that, you're fine. It sucks, but you'll be fine, I promise you. Meditate. We're in Portland, so it's fine to talk about this kind of stuff. I really don't like the word meditate. It seems very, San Francisco. But for me, it's this idea of kind of sitting quietly for a few minutes, just not doing anything. I find this extremely difficult, but it's also extremely valuable. Again, another research study says, particular types of meditation are great for creativity. Not the kind where you're doing a deep focus, but instead the kind where you're just kind of letting thoughts drift in. This idea of having a hobby or a side project, and I think Aaron in the talk before this mentioned this as well. Doing stuff that's related to your job, but is not kind of part of your job. So over winter break 2 years ago, I hooked my teapot up so that it could text me when my tea is done steeping. Why did I do this? Because I could, and nobody was going to pay me to do it. So it was just a side project because, let's face it, not all of our jobs are going to be completely fulfilling for us all the time. It just doesn't happen. So with a side project, you can do something that's just for you. That is something that gives you all the creative flexibility you need because you're the one in charge of it. The whole point of all of this is to heighten sensitivity. So much of the world that we live in is numbing. So much information comes at us. So much of our time is booked. So much of our thoughts are distracted, thinking of things in the future or stuff in the past. But the idea of building a creative practice is to kind of strip some of that down. Because there's a theory that I really like, and it's completely unproven and probably not true, but it's kind of beside the point. The idea is that your brain is a radio. It's a radio transmitter, and it's a receiver that brings things from the ether. And the more sensitive you are, the fainter the signals that you can pick up. And that's what I think a creative practice does for you. It's sandpaper to all that stuff that comes at you every day. And it allows you to receive these signals from everywhere. So there is a Zen proverb that says, after enlightenment, laundry. This is the laundry portion of this talk. So one of the things that we do when we increase this sensitivity to ourselves, it also makes us more vulnerable. And to me, there's never been, a harder time to be creative because you do get this instant feedback. Being a creative person in the past was much easier. You would do something and maybe, a small number of people might see it, or a review would come out in the paper, or, a couple, but now we get instant feedback. You put something up and like 3 minutes later, like there's, somebody on Twitter saying, oh, that's stupid, or, no, I could design a logo better than that. And I get it all the time. These are just a sample of some of the things I've been called, in the last year. And I'm all like, yeah, we miss you, Prince. So it's this idea, to be good, to be creative, you need to have that thin skin. But you also need a thick skin as well. And it's not just for writing. In order to create products, you need to be thin-skinned. But in order to ship products, you need to be thick-skinned. One way to do this is to really focus on making a body of work and not just any one individual piece, not one individual product. Every time that you get to create something, it's a chance to add to your body of work. And I think that's what we should think about when we think about, kind of our life's work is to create a body of work and not hang so much individual emphasis on any individual project or individual product. Just as one example, so Picasso made about 10,000 pieces in his life, maybe as many as 30,000. And that's like one piece of art a day for like 27 years at a minimum. And they weren't all good. There was a set of them that was incredible, but of that 10,000, how many, what was incredible? Like 50? So you're probably going to fail a lot when you're doing this, and that's okay. But you never want to celebrate failure itself. You celebrate the learning from failure. Oh, like that nice fail right there. Because failure sucks. I mean, I think my 2011, when I failed, that was terrible. You know, the people who tell you to like celebrate failure are people that have never had like a real failure in their entire lives. Because failure can just be devastating. And if you don't believe me, I'll show you my credit rating. It's terrible. So instead, celebrate what you learn from failure. Now, what to do when you get stuck? So at any moment on a project, you can get stuck. You can have things happen. You've got a writer's block. You've got a deadline. You can't. You're not in flow. So I'm sure most of you have seen this famous diagram from Csikszentmihalyi. It's, again, one of those things that they show at every design conference. But what no one really ever tells you in this is what to do if you're not in flow, if you're anxious or if you're bored. How do you get out of that? And so the whole point is, how do we adjust the variables to make things easier or harder for ourselves? So the first is around boredom. So let's start with the boring stuff. You know, how can we make something that's boring more interesting? So I think Thoreau has the key here, which is that the spirit in which you do it, whether is how you can make stuff more interesting. If the task is boring, make the way that you do it interesting. And the best way that you can do that is to make it personal. Make it personal. You know, what do you want to get out of this project? What do you want to get out of this task? What do you need to learn? What interests you? And Paul Sauer here says, I think designers who don't make it personal do terrible work, because the more that you make it personal, the more that you're willing to go that extra mile. That extra bit of motivation that you need is, hey, because I'm getting something out of this. Now, the other part is around, what if the challenge is too high? What if the challenge really is too high? So the first question you need to ask is, hey, is it that the challenge actually is too high, or that you think it's too high? This is too hard for me to do. What should I do? Is it fear? Is it this idea of self-doubt? Because fear, I think, is something that, it's a story that we tell ourselves about what we, can and cannot do. And it's easier to become paralyzed with fear before you even really try. And so here's my advice for that, is simply, act as though you're 10% more courageous. Just 10%. Doesn't have to be that much more courageous, but what would you do if you were 10% more courageous in that moment? If you can't do that, well, ask for help. There's no shame in that. Nobody knows everything. My daughter went to an art camp, and they're like, well, you couldn't ever say, well, I can't do this. You could always say, well, I can't do this yet. So this idea of asking for help, getting people to help you, and there's plenty of people, both on your teams and outside of your teams, that are willing to help. But you may get stuck. You may get stuck. And so there are really two unstuck strategies. First is just to power through it, and the second is to procrastinate. So the trick is knowing, how do you know which one to do when? So the first is this. So power through it when you know what needs to be done and how you're going to do it. So again, this could be about the boring part. Hey, make it interesting for yourself at this point. Sometimes this is about focusing on craft. How can I make this as good as I can do it? Also, there's a great creativity hack where if you can stop kind of midway through a task where you know the next piece of it, that's a great place to pick up the work. So power through it if you know what needs to be done. But you want to procrastinate when you're hitting the wall or haven't found that hook or line again, if you're still searching for those. Procrastination gets kind of a bad rap, but I think it's all part of the process, right? It means you're not ready. It means your brain is working on something, behind the scenes, or it's trying to, it's looking for that hook, or it's looking for that line. And some of it is to think about, hey, what's the feeling behind the procrastination? Are you stressed? Are you afraid? Are you doubting yourself, your abilities? And sometimes removing those, or even just writing those down or thinking about those, unblocks you. Now, there are some better ways to procrastinate. So things like, being able to, hey, take a walk. Again, it frees up the mind, frees up the body. I'm going to apologize for the next image I'm going to put in your mind. Woody Allen sometimes takes a couple different showers a day to unblock him. But that's another thing. Taking a shower, you're warm, you're hot. You're not thinking about things. Your body's relaxed. It allows your subconscious to work. Doing things like taking a drive, things where you don't have to think very much about it. Going somewhere new. Something that I hope that we'll all experience tonight, drinking alcohol. Again, a known thing for helping to unblock people. As my friend Jeff Bean says, alcohol is for generating ideas, caffeine's for documenting them. So. Because really, it's sometimes only when we stop trying that the solution arrives, and that's your moment of Zen. So practical creativity, we've talked a lot about reframing creativity. How do we not think about creativity as being something that only geniuses do, but instead is something that we can do. It's that combination of imagination and knowledge over the outside constraints. We talked about the grappling hook, the hooks that make things interesting, the line that makes things meaningful. We talked about building creative habits, things like taking a walk, keeping notebooks, meditating, taking those screen Shabbats, building that bag of lenses so that you can look at things differently. And then we talked about failure and getting unstuck. What happens when really the worst stuff happens to us? But I want to end with this. This is my daughter. This is my daughter Fiona. She's 15 years old. She's a sophomore in high school, and she's starting to think about colleges and think about what she wants to do with her life. And we were having this conversation. She said, "Oh, I don't think I want to go into a creative career like you and Mom. I think I just much rather do something safe." And I said, "No, you can't do that." This is the advice that I gave her. I said, "No, you need to be weird. You need to be unusual. You need to be creative, because that's what's going to save you." We're approaching a time where, by some estimates, 2 billion people are going to be out of work thanks to automation and algorithms and robots and those kinds of things. So anything that machines can do, they will do. But the only thing that you can really do to protect your livelihood and protect the work that we all love is to do things that those things cannot do. And that is simply to be weird, to be unusual, to be creative, because that's what's going to save you. Thank you. It's great to be here.